Welcome to Weird Web Radio, an explorer's guide to hidden worlds of the paranormal and occult, reality-expanding experiences, and the downright weird and bizarre. With your host, Lonnie Scott.
And we are recording in spite of all the audio gremlins that tried to bug us this time. Jason Mankey, welcome back to Weird Web Radio.
It is really nice to be back. It's been a couple of years because I've been not procrastinating for years now.
Yeah, we were just talking about that. And for those listening, I was explaining, you do not have to write a book to be on my show. It just seems that way.
When you have a book come out, everybody's like, "Oh yeah, let's interview you." And the last one that I've written has taken 2 years, which is really weird for me. So I haven't been on anybody's shows. I'm out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah. Well, like I was telling you, and I've told, my Patreon supporters and members of my Facebook group and stuff. I saw that you posted recently something about wanting to talk about Yule. I know it's one of your favorite topics. You wrote Llewellyn's little book of Yule. So this is a book you've written, kind of, yes.
It is.
Not recently. So I thought, why not? This could be a really fun conversation because we are entering that time of year. So with Yule, it's a real big topic. Where do you like to start when you get into Yule? Do you want to start where it comes from? Do you want to start what it looks like now? What sounds good to you?
It is a really big topic. I think, to me, it's the most pagan of all of the Sabbats. So many of our modern Sabbats have a lot of modern gloss on them, but people have been celebrating the winter solstice for 10,000 plus years. It is our longest active celebration as human beings that we are aware of it. And some of our earliest monuments as human beings were created in honor of the winter solstice. So to me, it's a huge deal, and it's very pagan. It's not like Ostara. There was no Ostara celebration 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, but people have been doing stuff around the winter solstice for 10,000 years. That's pretty amazing when you think about it, right?
That is pretty amazing. And the winter solstice being, amongst those dates that we have evidence and archaeology even that people were measuring time in some way or fashion with giant monuments even.
Yeah. I mean, Stonehenge is mostly famous as a summer monument, right? Summer solstice, but it also tells you when the winter solstice is. And that might have even been more important 3,500 years ago. I mean, we'll never know for sure, but yeah, it's hugely important, the winter solstice. And then more modern, 2,500 years ago stuff, instead of 10,000 years ago or 3,500 years ago. But, the ancient Romans with Saturnalia had a huge influence on what we still do today. And of course, how Christians celebrate Christmas. I would argue that Christmas would be very, very different without the Saturnalia, and nobody would have cared because it would not have been any fun at all. All of the fun stuff comes from the Roman Saturnalia. So that's always a good place to start, really.
Yeah, let's start with Saturnalia because I will fully confess I really don't know a lot about what it is. In my brain, I have this one thing rattling around that it was like a time when slaves could do something.
Absolutely.
Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. That is correct. So, depending on who the emperor was, because some emperors like to shorten Saturnalia, it was either a 7, a 5, or a 3-day celebration that occurred in mid to late December around the winter solstice. And it was a time for eating really good food, and it was a time for drinking a lot, and it was for subverting the social order. And if you were a slave owner, and let's be honest, the Roman Empire was built on slavery. It was, a part of that. So if you were a slave owner, you waited on your slaves during Saturnalia. And as one writer put it, everyone gets the best drink and everyone gets the best meat. And one of the slaves would be in charge of the household during the Saturnalia. It was also a time when people did a lot of cross-dressing because you could get away with a lot of things. A lot of emperors banned gambling. I mean, we always think of pagans as being full of vice, and always having fun. A lot of them were prudes. Like Octavian was a prude, right? But you could get away with all of this stuff at the Saturnalia, and that extended into the Christmas season. I like to call this misrule as a big name for it all. And if you go throughout Europe, you'll see instances of boy bishops where a child is put in charge of a church or a cathedral on Christmas. And that goes right back to Saturnalia, super far back to Saturnalia. Even a custom like wassailing, which today we kind of think of wassailing as, oh, we're going to go get drunk and sing Christmas carols. Wassailing was misrule. It was going from door to door and asking or demanding from your, I don't like to use the term betters, but people who had more things in society for you to have those things. You go door to door, you sing a song, and you expect in return really good booze and really good food. And that all goes back to the Saturnalia and misrule and that whole idea of subverting the social order. And then, of course, on the Saturnalia, people decorated with evergreen boughs. They decorated with holly. They decorated with ivy. Oh, does that sound familiar at all? And they also love to sing songs. Even Christmas caroling really comes from the Saturnalia. So, did Christians steal the Saturnalia? People like to say, oh yeah, they just stole everything from us. Well, I mean, if I was a Christian if I was a pagan and I converted to Christianity, I'd probably just want to keep all of my cool stuff. Right. Also too, like, if you saw all this cool stuff going on around you, you'd probably want to participate. The Saturnalia was about Saturn. It was a celebration of harvest and abundance and things, but there wasn't like this deep religious meaning to it. It was an excuse to get drunk and to eat and to have a lot of fun. And for a long time, that's what Christmas was. People don't get this now. Like, Christmas is transformed in the last 200 years to this holiday in the parlor with children and trees. Christmas used to be for getting drunk, fornicating, gambling, gluttony, and to go out and have the best time possible, because the rest of the year you just weren't allowed to do that. So, Eo Saturnalia.
Yeah, in my baby pagan days, I remember that sounded like how people described Beltane to me.
Yeah, very much. Less eating. We don't do like a whole lot of
drinking and fornicating.
There is kind of some eating going on at Beltane, but I'm talking about conventional eating that goes on, right? Like, dinner.
Yeah.
There's also another holiday too that's important too in this equation. The Romans celebrated the start of every month. Romans, if you were a Roman citizen, you had a lot of holidays. You had a lot of days off. But they celebrated the January calends, which were the start of January. It lasted a couple of days. And you just kept all your Saturnalia decorations up. And that was when you gave presents out. One writer was like, the urge to spend seizes everyone, and presents pour forth. So, you had this long extended holiday season. And today, especially in the United States, our like holiday season is, long, and that there's this long window where they want you to buy stuff. But it sort of ends New Year's, or if you go to Target, they're already putting the stupid Valentine's Day up on the 27th of December, right? But I mean, it used to Christmas season always lasted until Epiphany, January 6th. And in some instances, even beyond that. And the highlight of the holiday season was not Christmas for a long time. It was Twelfth Night, which was January 5th. And if you got a present, whether it was Christmas Day, New Year's Day, or on Twelfth Night, you just called it a Christmas present. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just trying to bring Twelfth Night back really hard. I just want the holidays to be longer.
Well, in heathenry, we look back to the past a lot, like most, Reconstructionist sort of based religions in paganism too. And, one thing that is prevalent is Yule is a word that comes up over and over again in all of the Scandinavian European language. They even have a attestation to it in the Gothic calendar. One of the very few things that they can point to and prove. So it was clearly a very important thing, and it's a season. It's a tide. It's not.
It's not just
date.
the winter solstice. Yeah.
Right.
That's what a lot of people, when you talk about ancient Yule, don't get. Like, I've read sometimes Yule's 2 months long or several weeks long, but it's a season, absolutely a season, because it's dark and the meat is ready to drink, and you've just slaughtered all the cattle. In a lot of ways, I think it was a lot like the Roman Saturnalia, in that, there's two ways to look at winter. It's very scary, because if you had a bad harvest and all your cattle died, you're in big trouble. Right? You're in big trouble. But if everything worked, it was a great time of year, because you could get drunk because you've fermented everything. And also there was a lot of meat because you slaughtered animals before the winter, and you could keep the meat good because it was cold. It was like nature's refrigerator. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not wrong. There are some of those. I mean, there are definitely shared customs that move through the centuries, from Saturnalia and then Northern Europeans doing their thing. So where do some of the ideas of Yule, do you think, get blended into Saturnalia and become Christmas? When does that happen more formally, do you think? And where do we really lose touch with that as well? I think culturally might be something we can look into.
Like, the blending in is really interesting, because there's a lot of argument now. Like, you and I are like of the same age. In the 90s and the early aughts, you would always hear things like the Sol Invictus, the unconquerable sun, was born on Christmas Day, and Mithra was born on Christmas Day, and Jesus stole their birthdays. He just came in and swooped in and took them. And now there is a growing body of evidence that suggests kind of the opposite, that some of these holidays were put near Christmas to compete with Christmas, which, for pagans is like, oh no, how terrible. But, it's, I don't give a crap. I mean, I just think it's all fun. But again, the things that Christians did, though, all came from the Saturnalia, right? Like the drinking, the eating, because they did all of that too. So right. Whether or not pagans were trying to maybe take back the day a little bit or not, it doesn't really matter. Or did Christmas evolve? There's another theory about Christmas. So one of the ideas now is that December 25th was picked for Christmas, not because of its closeness to a pagan holiday, though it is very close to Saturnalia. That it was picked because it was believed that Jesus died on March 25th. And at the time, there was this idea that if you died in Christianity, like as a martyr or something, you would die on your birthday. So you always had to be really careful on your birthday. Like, don't celebrate, just hide in the basement, right? And then the next day you can come up. But Jesus being special, like, entered Mary's womb on March 25th, which would make him born on December 25th. So this is when I talk to Christians, and they're like, see, that's how it happened. And so there's nothing pagan about it. But all of the shit that you do, though, is pagan for a long time. All the shit. So when they started celebrating Christmas, they kept all that stuff. And church fathers have fought against it for hundreds of years because they knew where it came from. But it's hard to stop people from having a party when they've been having a party for several centuries. And so a lot of that stuff just sort of blends into Christian celebration of Christmas. Where Christmas changes, though, is in the early 19th century, when people who are in the middle class now, they don't want to play the games of wassail, right? They're like, yeah, I worked for this, and I'm not really that flush with cash. I can't serve all of you my best booze, so I'm going to close the door and turn off the lights. And these people were really influential in society. Sometimes they're called the Knickerbockers. They were writing a lot in New York, and they began to write about Christmas in a different way. Instead of a loud, drunken, raucous party, full of people 2 steps from going to jail, they wrote about it as a holiday for kids, right? So, Santa becomes more important and stuff. And then all of a sudden you have this growing middle class and this desire for children to be children instead of children having to work from 9 to 5 like their parents. And then you have manufacturing so people can buy presents and stuff for kids, and it makes it easier. So the holiday kind of shifts away from what it had been for a long time. which to me is kind of sad, but it also lives on a little bit in things like the office Christmas party or New Year's Eve, especially. That's where we've decided to put all of the bad behavior for the holidays.
Yeah, as I play in the APA pool leagues, and my pool teams, the bar we play out of, we have a Christmas party, and we do the white elephant gift giving, where you get a chance to steal gifts, and of course there's plenty of drinking. I feel like we're getting in touch with the OG kind of way of doing these things.
Absolutely. That was for a long time the OG thing. And I think it still exists. It's hard to imagine anything during the holiday season without like a big meal, right? And that big meal probably has wine and other things. And there's lots of parties and social gatherings and things. Winter is a tough time to travel in if you live in the Midwest. And I think a lot of places are being hit right now while we're talking. But anyways, doesn't matter. There's still all this stuff that you're supposed to go out and do.
That is true.
Right?
It is. The calendar says you're supposed to be traveling. Doesn't matter. There's ice on the roads or a blizzard. Get your ass to where you're supposed to go. Yeah, it is weird.
I remember like when I lived in Michigan, we had a huge New Year's Eve party and we were expecting a blizzard, not just snow, but like a blizzard. It was going to dump like 1 or 2 feet of snow on the road during New Year's Eve. And I was like, well, no one's going to come over tonight. We have all this booze and all this food and, but it'll be fun. The 6 of us will have a great time. The house was full of people. There are people showing up at 2 and 3 in the morning, like who had driven in a foot of snow to get to my house. It's like, wow. I loved the dedication. I loved it. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I dig it. I love it. There's all kinds of that history there. Yes, for sure. When I guess I'll just call it the neo-pagan calendar, right? Mm-hmm. The modern pagan calendar, we all tend to reference to some degree or another, the 8 days around the year.
Yeah.
The earliest forms of Yule, I guess, as it shows up on there, is it just a solstice celebration? Did it become more Yule tide focused? How does it transform into what it becomes in modern paganism, I guess?
So I never like to say, well, somebody was the first modern pagan, right? Because it always pisses somebody off. But the first real documented group of people that we would definitely say are probably modern pagans are Gardnerian witches, Gerald Gardner and the like. And the early Gardnerian practice was there were 4 greater Sabbats, which were, Samhain, and they didn't call them Samhain in the book. They called them November Eve and like February Eve, right? Like they didn't have, they didn't have the like real poetic names. August Eve, right? So, anyways, the 4 greater Sabbats that most of us know and love, and then they would celebrate the equinoxes and solstices, but they would celebrate them on the full moon closest to the equinox or solstice. So, your winter solstice celebration could be a couple of weeks early or a couple of weeks late, depending. But one of the things about Yule, though, in Gerald Gardner's first book, Witchcraft Today, which came out in 1954, there's a little bit of a Yule ritual, and he clearly calls it Yule. And by contrast, like the spring equinox and the autumn equinox were poetically called spring equinox and autumn equinox, right?
Yeah.
So there was something about the holiday that really spoke to people. A few years later, somebody writes to Gardner and says, I think it would be really great if we could celebrate the equinoxes and solstices, like on the equinoxes and solstices. And Gardner's like, bloody good. What a great idea. Maybe we should start doing that. And so that ends up sort of being the modern wheel of the year from there. But even when they really weren't supposed to be celebrating the winter solstice on the winter solstice, they still called it Yule, right? And it just had a little extra resonance, right? I think there was just juice there. I think it helps when everyone around you is celebrating a holiday that's really similar to what you're doing. Yeah.
That does help.
And as a Gardnerian, I can't talk about like Gardnerian ritual a whole lot, but in a lot of ways it's really simple. And in the 1970s, people start writing books about, how to celebrate the Sabbats and start writing their own rituals. And so, things kind of get blended into it and it becomes a really great holiday for doing a lot of different stuff. Because if you did something at Christmas as a Christian, I think you can do it at Yule. It's completely fine. You've got Oak King and Holly King that you can do. And that's not really very historical, but as a myth, it's a really great myth, right?
Mm-hmm.
I like to watch people dressed up as plants fighting with swords. I think it's great. Yeah,
I'd buy that ticket. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, when I was a baby pagan, a lot of times what we celebrated was sort of like the rebirth of the god, right? Like the rebirth of the sun god. And of course, what a great time for that, right? So there's all different ways to celebrate the solstice. And since the 70s, we've really been crafting new and imaginative ways to do so. Whatever appeals to you. Some people like a somber solstice. I have a lot of friends who are like, we're going to stay up until the sun rises the next morning.
I have friends that do that.
I'm going to bed.
Yeah, I go to bed.
Yeah, I can't do it.
I'll say some hi days to the sun when I get up.
Yeah. Some days I wake up before the sun rises and look at it for a minute, but I didn't stay up all night. And then, for me, I like rituals at Yule that are like Saturnalia. So like mine are loud and raucous and have wassail and things at them.
Oh, I dig. So this is what you do with your coven?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can you describe any of it, or is it locked behind secretive Gardnerian doors?
No. Well, I've got a Gardnerian coven and a non-Gardnerian coven. So the non-Gardnerian coven is like my sandbox, right? I can do all kinds of things there. And a lot of those are in my Witch's Wheel of the Year book, plug. But I'll tell you what we do, because I'm not one of those people. But like for what tonight we're doing is we're drinking wassail. We've got a bunch of ingredients that we're putting into apple cider, and it's on the crock pot. It'll be nice and warm. And the idea is we're putting into the cider the attributes and the things that we want in the new year. Like, I'm going to put the cinnamon in here because that's going to spice up my love life, right? And
nice.
I'm going to put an orange slice in here because I'm looking for a little more sunshine, and I'm going to use allspice for health and cloves for this. And I need something a little bit more wild, so I'm going to pour the shot of whiskey in it, right? That's what we're doing. And then we're going to jump over our Yule log. And our Yule log is not a log that's on fire. It's a log with candles in it, right? So you jump over the candles. Yeah, but that's what we're going to do tonight. Yeah, no robes. This is a fire hazard. Yeah, jeans. This is a jeans coven. It's much easier that way.
Yeah, nice.
But I've also done the somber, we're celebrating the sun god being born, or lighting candles in darkness to celebrate the return of the light. I mean, those things are beautiful too. It's just I like to party. I feel like some kid, I like to party, Lonnie.
I like to party.
I like to party. What'd your coven do? We partied. Yeah.
I love it. No, I like that. That's cool. And because my own practice, the night before the winter solstice is Mother's Night, and a ritual to honor, the mothers, the grandmothers, and all the way back. And that would include, even those who, I'm sure we all have them in our life. I know I had more than a few. I was very blessed that way to have women who weren't actually your mother or grandmother, but they were still very motherly, influential figures on me. I do a ritual to honor them. That one's a little more somber, I guess, thinking about their connection and what they meant to all of us. Then the solstice celebration, and then I'm a little raucous after that. I have my fun, and I get out, and I like to focus on having time with friends and things of that nature. But another part of this time of year is, for me anyway, and I wish it were more common, I like to bring ghost stories back to this time of year.
Yeah, that's a long tradition. I mean, they did that at ancient Yule, 1,500 years ago. That was definitely a part of Yule. And up until through the 19th century, it was a part of Christmas celebrations. I mean, the most famous story in the English language is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And what is that? It's a ghost story.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And second most
Yeah.
famous, I say, Scrooged, also a ghost story. No.
Hmm. Yeah, it's all ghost stories. I'm with you. I think that would be great. And to me, like, the veil is still thin, and I feel a lot closer to many of my beloved dead this time of year than any other. I mean, my
Yes.
grandparents didn't do anything for Halloween when I was a kid, but they
Yeah.
did stuff for Christmas. I mean, those are memories. Those are cherished memories. And
Yep.
a lot of what I do as an adult is just trying to recreate the atmosphere that they gave me when I was younger.
Yeah.
And
I
that
like
brings me
that.
closer to them. Yeah.
I like that a lot because, again, for me, uh, this time of year is when, I mean, if you want to talk about the veil or whatever, but I feel like that's when it's at its thinnest. We're at our closest to the other world, the underworld, ancestors, and the dead in general. The world is dark. There's not a leaf in sight, at least here, in the Northern Hemisphere and where I live, especially in Illinois. I mean, it feels like you've entered into the underworld in some sorts, like you've gotten to the gateway, and it's just death everywhere you look in a way.
I won't tell you that in Northern California, my grass is green and alive for the first time in 6 months. It's
Yeah.
it's really different, right? Like we get rain,
Right.
and lows in the 50s. It's really
You get
colder.
mud season is what I would call that. Yeah.
Yeah. And even then it's not like a good Midwestern rain. It's more of
Yeah.
like just a steady drizzle for long periods.
Yeah. If this is a thing that anyone listening can do, one thing that I like to recommend this time of year is to take cemetery walks. On a day where the weather's nice, it might be cold and crisp, but out of the rain and whatnot. And pay attention not just to the graves, but pay attention to like the different monuments that are put in your cemetery, because often that's a clue to oftentimes weird and strange things that have happened in your own community in the past that may not even exist anymore. I mean, I discovered the Knights of Pythias this way. Didn't even know that was a thing until I got to digging into what's this big obelisk in the middle of the cemetery, who put it here. And the Grand Army of the Republic and how that all got formed, I discovered on one of my cemetery walks one day. And it's just cool way to connect with the past in a more general ancestors of your community kind of fashion. And this is a great time of year to do that.
One of my favorite things to do this time of year, especially on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, because people don't travel as much, like the winter solstice, a Friday or a Saturday this year, technically it's either the 20th or 21st. So there's cars running around everywhere, but going out on Christmas Eve or Christmas night, it's so quiet outside.
Yes.
Right. And that it's beautiful and magical. And the only time I've ever experienced that outside of those 2 nights was during the early days of COVID lockdowns. But to me, it's just magical. Like when a car does rumble by, it's definitely the exception and not the rule. And I live in like a very busy place, so it's very, very quiet. And the cold air, changes how the sound is because there's not really any moisture in the air. And it's magical. I love it so much.
It is magical. Speaking of magical, are there any sort of magical practices that people should be getting into or could be getting into around Yule?
For us, a lot of things that we do are about growth if we start them on the winter solstice proper, because now we're in the waxing half of the year. So if you're doing big magic, it's a really great time to start something like, big magic. I'm trying to buy a house, or like I'm really trying to change my circumstances, right? Like everything. This is a really great time for doing that. And if we're still several days away from the winter solstice as we record this. So this is the time when the days are super short, right? So you still have that waning energy for a little while and it's at its peak. So you could tap into that and try to get rid of things. Those are easy sorts of magic to do in conjunction with where we are with the sun and the seasons. Also, I'm a big believer in that you should tap into the energies that are around you. So for a lot of people, this is the end of the year. I know a lot of witches celebrate the new year at Samhain, but most of the energy is at January 1st in our society. So this is a good time to clear things out and to start new things and to take advantage of that energy. I like to do a big house cleaning, on New Year's Eve, and then sweep all the bad energy outside my house and start fresh for the new year.
Yeah. Do you start at a certain place in the house and work your way to a specific place? I've seen some hoodoo traditions suggest this.
Our house is really small, so you just start in the bedroom and then work, because that's how you get to the front door. There's one floor. There's no stairs to worry about, right? There's not a whole lot going on, and it's Northern California, so somehow like this 1,000 square feet is a $2 million house. Yeah, it's a really terrible place. It's gonna be a terrible place to live.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm glad you can do it while you can, though. I mean, that matters. Is there anything about Yule, winter solstice, any of that you want to get into that I'm not thinking of? Because, like you say, it's a big topic, but we really have drilled into certain areas here.
I can talk about traditions of this time of year for, probably an hour, but I don't want to put anybody through that. But one of the things that really bothers me about this time of year, though, and kind of about Samhain too, online, is all of the memes that you see, which are just wrong. They're not untruthful, or I don't know. They're just wrong. There's just so much that's wrong. And people, get excited about them because, they're poetic or whatever. I think the big one, I think last year and early this year was, decorating a tree as an act of witchcraft.
I see that all the time.
Yeah. Decorating a tree can be an act of witchcraft if you're intentional about it. But for a lot of for a lot of people, it's just decorating a tree, right? Yes. Speaking in absolute sometimes is not the way. And there was one today, I think I saw about Christmas trees and, sprites in the forest and all these other things. And there's a very clear history of the Christmas tree. We know that pagans decorated with evergreen boughs. We know they decorated with branches, but they didn't decorate with whole trees. Certainly there were pagan groups that revered trees, but that's different than I'm going to go out on the winter solstice and chop down a tree, drag it back to my house, and then decorate it, right? And then in the Middle Ages, Christians began decorating trees for the Feast of Adam, and they would call it, it's in my brain, but it's like getting scrambled. But they grabbed this tree, and it was supposed to represent the tree in the Garden of Eden, the tree with knowledge, and they decorate with apples. And that's probably between those two, spheres, like pagans decorating with boughs and Christians dating what they called this paradise tree. That's where you get Christmas trees, right? But It didn't have anything to do with woodland spirits or whatever, right? Would be really cool if it did. I wish that some of these things were real, because they're much more fun than the truth. But yeah, just don't take memes as like truth. Like, do a quick Google search before sharing a meme.
Yeah. And to a point, I think a lot of that stems from just the desire for whatever it is in our practices. There's a desire for it to be old. We want it to be old.
Yeah. And it is old, though. It doesn't need the embellishment. It's old. Like evergreens at the winter solstice through Saturnalia are 2,500 years old. They're plenty old, right? You don't have to make up anything fanciful for it to be old, right? And some things are newer, like Santa is newer, but people are like, well, this is a Christian tradition or a pagan tradition, but really they're traditions that people make up and often have very little to do with religion at all. There's nothing in the Bible that says, and then Jesus was attended to by Santa Claus, right? I mean, it's not in there.
No, well,
And
Santa's become a very powerful god in many respects.
absolutely,
he knows everything. He sees everything. He knows
he
how to
knows when
judge
you're
your
awake.
soul.
Yeah, he knows if you've been bad or good.
Yes, see,
Right? Yeah. But I mean, I think we get I think a lot of people in society get way too hung up on kind of exactly where these things come from. And I'll admit, I love knowing where they come from. But if it speaks to you, then you should use it. It's really fine. I mean, Christmas is not a closed practice. It's a practice that you can find at Walmart. It's not a closed practice. It's open to anybody who wants to sell it, to sell it. It's open to everyone who wants to celebrate it, regardless, of religious tradition. And for me, I think that we can put it all into our Yule celebrations. For me, it's the holiday season. At our house, we do Yule and, we do Christmas because everything's closed anyways. We might as well do something that day, right? And my wife has that day off from work, right? She doesn't get solstice off necessarily, right? So, yeah, just enjoy it all. I mean, it's all connected anyways.
Right. It is a lovely blend of various things that have come to us through time. And I mean, honestly, I get my religious celebration from this time of year through my own practice with my fellow heathens, with myself, with my friends. Christmas, what's called Christmas, in my family, at the parties I go to with like my pool teams, it's called Christmas, but it has zero Christianity in it. Really, there's nothing religious to it. It's gift giving and food and games, and we don't go to a church or anything. My family's not a religious family like that, so it's a pretty pagan, secular kind of thing anyway.
My favorite was when I was a Methodist way in the long, long ago, far, far away. We used to have a morning service and a late morning service, right? So 9 or 11, Sunday school in the middle. At Christmas, they canceled one of the two services every year because nobody came to church on Christmas Day. And there was no Sunday school either. That was the day nobody came because Christmas was not a celebration at church. People came Christmas Eve, but they didn't come on Christmas Day. That was a day for being with family and doing other things, because really it has gotten away from religion. And if somebody is religious and Christmas means something to them in that way, I think that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. Just don't tell the rest of us how to celebrate it.
Right.
Yeah.
Could not agree more.
Yeah.
I put out a thing asking folks for questions in Facebook, on Patreon. I got several kind of the same theme emailed to me, and one got posted in the Facebook group. The theme of the email really fits in with what we're talking about still too, in a way, and it basically came down to this. It seems I've got a lot of people out there with problematic people in their families that don't want to feel obligated to go spend time with them because it's a holiday, and they're wrestling with that notion. What sort of advice do you offer people in that position?
You could do what my wife and I did, which was move 1,000 miles away from our family. No, it is a really hard question. It is really hard because, sometimes we love our families, but we don't necessarily love being around our families. And how do you balance that? And you have to balance out your mental health and your own well-being. And it's really hard. To me, it's just sort of being truthful. Maybe after this election, maybe you just can't do that at this point, right? Like I'm not ready. I'm not ready yet to talk to Uncle Fred. I just can't do it. And I think that's reasonable. Also, I think our chosen families are really important, and those could be whether or not they're, from a coven or pagan group of some sort or a social group. spending time with those people is just as valid and just as important as anything else. Or you could take the coward's way out and I'm not feeling well. I don't think I can make it. I'll be back. I'll be back over next year.
I mean, outside of my kids, I would say my chosen family has become vastly more important to me than anyone else. And most of my immediate family are, deceased at this point anyway. I don't remember where I heard it, but it was somebody talking about advice they got from their therapist, and it basically kind of fits this situation. And it said something to the effect of the first 18 years of your life should not obligate you to being further traumatized by people if they're harming you or abusing you or something of that sort in some way.
Absolutely. Yeah. You shouldn't go to a place that's going to bring you trauma, right? Or just really bring you down. You should avoid that if it's, and it's hard to tell parents no. Even if you don't like your parents, it's still hard to tell them no. But sometimes I think you really have to. My wife was always really good about it. Like when we lived in Michigan and we lived close to our families, we kind of said, Christmas is what we're going to do together. And we did coven stuff too. But I mean, that was always the 20th or whatever. So you all, if we're going to do something with you, need to decide what day that we're doing it. And then sometimes there were parts of the family we just didn't visit, right? We just, we can't. Just can't make it that day.
Yep.
Yeah. Stepdad, you suck. No, we just can't go.
And that's legitimate.
It is legitimate.
And also, I accept that you might be the person that sucks that people don't want to visit too.
Yeah. And maybe that's
somebody.
Hey, maybe that's the best way to be. Then you don't have to deal with these situations.
Yes. There is the whole tradition of the Icelandic trolls. That's a thing. You could always embrace your inner Yuletide troll, and I don't know a lot about them. An episode of the Sabrina, the Netflix series.
Oh, with the Yule lads. Yeah.
They did a special about them, which was pretty cool. I don't know how accurate, but it was fun.
And a lot of the mythology of those particular figures really dates back to Norse mythology and paganism.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, their mother was a deity, and she still has the same name. It's not coming to me right now, and I apologize.
I guess I don't know what it is either.
But I mean, it's some of those Scandinavian things really do go back to ancient paganisms. Which is just it's cool to me. Super awesome.
Yeah, that is true. One thing in heathenry we have that some others don't is we just have some materials, at least for Scandinavian stuff. In the Facebook group, make sure I see all of them. That's the only one. Yeah. Kitty, thank you for participating. Kitty she says she loves your books and your blog. Glad you're coming back to the show. Question: top 3 pieces of advice for folks new to planning open ritual. And the context given was assuming they've got a solid footing with solitary and closed group ritual already. So looking for top 3 pieces of advice for basically planning a ritual.
So if you're gonna do a large group ritual that's pretty much open to anybody, I think the most important thing to do is to plan an activity in the middle that everyone is involved with. And this is harder than it sounds because there are certain things that you want to avoid. You want to avoid lines as much as you can because people waiting in line are not paying attention to really what's going on, might start chattering with each other, right? And then your ritual kind of goes off the rails. But that is the hardest part, is to find something for people to do. And you don't want to just talk at people. You want to make sure that they're actively engaged and putting energy into the ritual. And there are some easy ways to do that. I mean, moving is an easy way to do that. Kind of gets cliched after a while, but that's a good way. Making people yell is a great way to do things, like have them yell things back at you. People love that. I mean, might
That's
just be
true.
because I go to a lot of festivals where most people probably come to my rituals a little tipsy, but they love yelling at, when I tell them to yell. So, I mean, but again, find something for people to do. Also, I think it's important to meet expectations at a ritual. If you're doing a Samhain ritual, most people expect a Samhain ritual to be about reuniting with the spirits of our beloved dead, right? Like our ancestors or people that we've lost that we knew in this lifetime. And if you pull out, oh, we're going to do a ritual that's about forest fires for Samhain, you're going to have people shaking their heads and confused. And that happened here, and we have a lot of fires, and it was a great idea, but people have an expectation for Samhain, right? So you want to try to meet that expectation. Because if you don't, they're just going to spend the ritual wondering, like, when are we doing this? When are we doing that? And then, like, oh, we didn't do that. That's really disappointing because that's what I would have wanted to do. So try to meet expectations for a ritual, and then try to do things that are at least somewhat familiar to people. It's great to be creative in ritual, but if you have a bunch of strangers that are kind of getting together for the first time, maybe creative quarter calls using correspondences that no one else has ever used it's not the right time for that. Right? People like the familiar to a degree. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you're doing that kind of thing, you need to embrace it. If you want to do something weird, do it with a small group of people, or make sure that you've really advertised ahead of time. This ritual is going to be very, very, very different, because again, people have an expectation for certain things. And then there's also a little bit about staging, which is really important. Make sure you're standing in places where people can hear you. I remember my first big public group rituals. Anyone who called the quarter would always go outside the circle and then talk in towards that direction. So their back is to everybody. And then you could never hear them, right? Same time somebody cast in the circle. They're really basically outside the circle. And you're like, are they done? Oh, wait, no, they're right behind me, because you can't hear them. So, think about that. Also, when you do big group ritual, it's very theatrical. Everything that you do needs to be loud and big. Talk slowly. You cannot speak slowly and loudly enough. And every gesture that you do needs to be big. This sounds really silly, but it's true, because you want somebody who's 40 feet from you to see what you're doing. If you're doing this symbolic great rite with a knife and a cup, raise that knife high in the air, slowly bring it down to the cup. The person holding the cup should maybe raise it up a little bit too, so everyone can see what's going on. But, think about those things, because that's also how to get people involved, right? If they know what's happening in the ritual, it's easier for them to get involved.
I like that. All very good advice. I've done a lot of public ritual, mostly with an ADF group. And one thing we always did was to make sure that the ritual script was cut into sections and ask anyone who wanted to participate, would you like to read this part? Would you like to read this part? Getting people involved, if that's an option, is always a good thing. That's that giving people a thing to do. And there was one part of the ritual that always humored me a lot. It was making an offering to outsiders, any spirits that may be here to interfere, cause ill will, whatever, let's just make the peace with you, so you'll leave us alone. Here's an offering for you. And when we would do the indoor rituals, we always used UU church space on the University of Illinois campus in Champaign-Urbana. And a couple people got it in their head, I guess, they would leave the building entirely to go make that offering and then come back inside. So that entertained me. Because they heard outsiders, I guess. They thought they really meant outside.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And, other than that, the only other thing I would say is to be as clear up front before things start what is going to happen, and the degree of expectation and non-expectation that is, allowable, I guess. because you always want everyone participating, especially when there's strangers among strangers, to give complete consent to what is about to occur.
I always
That's what I would add to
yeah.
that.
Yeah, I always try to tell people kind of what we're going to do before it happens. And then if somebody's uncomfortable, they can leave before it happens. And
Yes.
another thing about ritual, too, is like giving people things to do is important, but you also don't want somebody hijacking your ritual. And sometimes if you do something where you let everyone kind of go around the circle and talk, there's that one person who wants to talk for 20 minutes. And you just don't have time for that, right? And then everybody else is going to tune out. So you got to make sure that, the focus is, always on the ritual. It's great to have people say like one or two things, but you don't want a soliloquy or a monologue going on, right? Because then you've lost control of your ritual and you may never get it back. It's really hard. It's really hard. I think anybody who does public ritual deserves a round of applause because you really are putting yourselves out there, and we don't go to seminary to learn these things, right? Most of us just learn through trial and error. It's really different from a lot of other, spiritual paths.
Yeah. And when I will hold meetups once in a while, say, put it on Facebook events and stuff and say, hey, if you're interested in heathenry, I'll be here at this time answering some questions, just a little show and tell. And I always take a bottle of apple cider with me and some Dixie cups, basically. And before people leave, I introduce them to the ritual concept of a sumble. And that whole careful what people will say too long really matters, because I'll have to remind them, hey, we're going to go around just one round. You can hail an ancestor, a god, a goddess, whatever. And please keep it short.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I have been at big, especially sumbles, big ones, where people sing songs and have written poetry, and it can take a minute.
Which is great in certain instances, right? I mean, if I was with a small group, I would love that, right? Because we know you and we know your devotion. We want to hear your song. But if I got 60 people there, I don't have time for a 5-minute song. It's really different. Another thing, too, is, and I keep, this is now way more than 3 things, but make sure your directions are really clear when you do a ritual. So every once in a while, we'll do a ritual that might have like 3 moving parts. We did a in-bulk ritual once because I hate lines, right? So I want to make sure there's lots of stuff to do. One of them was like, find the light in this room and then you can bring it to one of our altars because you're sharing the reborn light at in-bulk. We also had Bridget drawn down in 3 priestesses, in the middle of the room on a dais, which was really cool. And then they all gave everybody a coin that somebody could then throw in a well that we had set up, right? So lots of stuff. We repeated what all that stuff was 2 or 3 times during the ritual, right? Hoping that eventually it would catch up with everybody, right? Like before that part started, right before it started. And then we had a couple of people walking around to make sure that everybody knew they could do all of these different things. And I'd stolen that idea from somebody else, like having the 3 different faces of a goddess there. And there was one high priestess, though, who was more popular than the other 2 high priestesses. So everybody wanted to wait to go into her line. I was like one of the first 3 people through. And so I sat there for an hour while I watched the other 2 priestesses basically just put their heads in their hands, and this giant line for one. So another thing is, if you do something like that, it's first come, first serve. You don't have a choice who you're going to, right? Yeah. You're going to that priestess, right? You're going to that priestess. Yeah.
That is interesting.
Less hurt feelings also keeps the line moving. Right? Also, maybe you need to see this other person, though. Maybe you're not supposed to see the person that you want, right? You're supposed to get a different message.
I was at a oracular Saith ritual modern kind of version that was created by the Rofnar kindred out west, out Northern California. And I was on the other coast for this, though. And there were 3 women in these high seats doing this particular form of ritual where they are supposed to go into like a trance state and be able to communicate. I call it a very theatric mediumship. That's what it looks like to me. And a lot of people were going to one and wanting the attention of one in particular. And I happen to think that same person, and I'll tell you, we talked about it when she was on my show. It was Irene Glass. Irene had a tone to her voice, a measure to her, the rhythm that she spoke, and a presence that suggested she really was in contact with something. And it just attracted people more to her in that ritual space. So I've seen that happen. Yeah.
And I get that, but too bad. The line is too long. You gotta go where we tell you to go.
Love it. Too bad.
Too bad.
If only you all could see the smile on this man's face.
You got to learn this early on in life that you're not going to get everything that you want.
That's right. Even at the ritual.
Even at the ritual.
Oh, man.
If the goddess wants you to see her, you'll see her.
I'm
feeling salty now, I guess. I'm feeling salty.
I guess so. Free hugs at the end. I think this is a good point to wrap up the regular portion of the show. Is there anything that you wanted to get into that maybe we didn't, or any parting thoughts on this whole matter you want to wrap it up?
No, I think we did a lot of Yule stuff. I got to be cantankerous and share some history, and I think we laughed a lot. It was good. It just is, to me, this is the best time of year. Just enjoy it, embrace, whatever it is that makes you happy, and find joy wherever you can.
That's right. And go out and get yourself the Little Book of Yule by Llewellyn. Published
by by Jason, published by Llewellyn.
That's right. I was going to correct myself.
Okay. That's all right.
There you go. And pick up some other great books by Jason Mankey.
Or don't. There are a lot of great authors out there. It's fine.
Or don't. Terrible marketing.
It's true. I'm not very good at it. That's for sure.
All right. Well, thank you again for taking this extra time. This has been a lot of fun. Where can people find you?
I'm everywhere. There's only 4 Jason Mankeys in the country, and
are you sure?
I've looked, and I top the search lists. Nobody comes close.
Nice.
Like the preacher's like 4 pages deep. Poor guy.
Nice. All right. For everybody listening, thank you as always. Please share this with your family and your friends. Spread it across your social networks. And please do go out and check out Jason's stuff. It's fun. It's great. It's informative.
Or not. It's really okay.
Let's see. He sucks at marketing. So that's why we're here to help. If you want to hear the rest of the conversation, we're going to have a little fun about things you can get for different sorts of pagans and witches and whatnot at this time of year as a gift. You're going to have to head over to Patreon to do that. So it is patreon.com/weirdwebradio or weirdwebradio.com and click join the membership. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. Stay weird, my friends. And now we're back to bonus audio time. Jason Mankey, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Yeah. Before we get to the gift giving, there's always that first question where I say, like, what famous person's resting place do you most want to visit? I know who it is for you. We all know who it is for you. We've done that with you. And so maybe this is the same answer. If you could have that Christmas spirit of the past come visit you, it doesn't have to be that same like punishing kind of theme, but just anyone from the past, who would you like to come visit you this Yule season?
Do you want to hear how they just answered that question? What famous person's resting place would you most like to visit? That and many others, including what they think about the afterlife. what they may or may not do in cemeteries, what are their traditions and magical practices that have to do with the dead, folklore that surrounds their homes, and so much more, available for only $5. $5 a month. Even if I make more than one episode in a month, it's still just $5 a month at patreon.com/weirdwebradio, or go to weirdwebradio.com and click join the membership. You can find me on Instagram at weirdwebradio. You can find me on Facebook as Weird Web Radio, or come join the new, fun and exciting Weird Web Radio Facebook group. Thank you again for being here. Stay weird out there, my friends.